Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and today we're going to be building and testing out a $750 new part gaming PC that's offering a surprising amount of value for the money. This system's rocking an AM5 CPU, powerful dedicated graphics card, and uses all high quality parts that should last for years to come. $750 is where you really start to get into that sweet spot for price to performance, where you're still getting an affordable system while making very few compromises. This PC's main focus is gaming, with it being able to play pretty much anything at 1080p high with 60 plus FPS, and even a lot of games at 1440p if you're willing to play around with the settings. I'll be testing a wide variety of games on this PC, including the soon to be released Monster Hunter Wilds, which you can currently grab for 16% off from the sponsor of today's video, Green Man Gaming. That's right, you can currently grab one of this year's most anticipated games for 16% off before it even releases, and this discount applies to all of the available versions. Unlike many of the key reseller sites, Green Man Gaming is an official games retailer that works directly with publishers to bring you the best games at the best prices. They have a massive library of over 9,000 games from 1,300 publishers, many of which you can get at a discount compared to buying them directly from Steam. For example, Hogwarts Legacy is currently 74% off on Green Man Gaming compared to it being the full $60 on Steam. Monster Hunter Wilds is definitely the highlight right now, being able to get it at a discount before it fully releases, but GMG has games for everyone. To pre-order Monster Hunter Wilds for 16% off, or to check out any of the thousands of deals on games, make sure to head to the link in the description. Thanks again to Green Man Gaming for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the build. So starting things off with the CPU, we are actually able to go AM5 at this budget, but not a general retail CPU. Instead, I went for the AMD Ryzen 5 7500F off of AliExpress that I only paid $130 for. Unfortunately, prices have gone up a bit, but you're still able to pick up this guy for around $140 to $150, which is still a pretty solid price. With 6 cores, 12 threads, and turbo speeds of up to 5 GHz, this is essentially a Ryzen 5 7600 without the integrated graphics or included stock cooler, neither of which we really need for this build. If you don't want to go the AliExpress route, you can totally grab a 7600, but you'll be paying about $40 to $50 more for virtually the same performance. The CPU is perfect for gaming and light workstation applications, while also offering an amazing upgrade path on the AM5 platform. For the motherboard, I went with an ASRock B650M PG Lightning. At $120, this is a super solid AM5 board offering 4 DIMM slots, multiple M.2 slots, decent PCIe expansion, and built-in Wi-Fi. With a nice neutral color scheme and solid back panel I/O, I think this is a great choice for this build. VRM wise, this will be able to handle any of the 8-core AM5 CPUs like a 9800X3D, but if you're wanting to go high core count, then you may want to spend a little bit more. To start things off, we're going to bring our attention to the CPU socket at the center of the motherboard, also taking note of the marked corner. Then we can press down and out on the retention arm and lift it all the way up. Then hinge up the socket cover to reveal the socket itself. Next, we can grab the CPU and line the notches in it with the notches in the socket, and also line up the marked corner and lower it into place, applying no pressure. Once in, it's as easy as lowering down the socket cover, hinging the retention arm back under the clip, and removing the plastic socket protector. To prep for the cooler installation, now is a good time to remove the 4 screws and 2 plastic pieces that are attached to the back plate here. For a cooler, we're going to be using the Thermalright Assassin X120. This is a tower style cooler that goes for around $17 on Amazon, and for that price, it's a great deal. Once unboxed, we can take the AMD spacers and put them on each of the backplate standoffs like this, and using these screws that were in the same bag as the AMD spacers, we can attach the 2 metal brackets like this, making sure they're fully secure. With that done, we can apply a pea-sized amount of thermal paste to the CPU IHS and lower down the heatsink, lining up the screws on it with the pegs on the bracket. Then it's just a matter of going back and forth, tightening the cooler down a few turns at a time until it's secure. Grabbing the fan, we can attach the thin metal clips to both sides like this, making sure to pay attention to the orientation of the fan itself. Then, holding the fan against the cooler, we can pull one of the clips over the heatsink like this, and while still holding the fan, do the same thing with the other clip on the other side of the heatsink. Next, the CPU fan cable is lined up with the fan header here and simply plugged into place like this, and then the excess cable can be tucked away like this for a cleaner look. Now we can grab out our memory, which is this 2x16GB kit of DDR5 memory at 6000 MHz CL30 from Silicon Power. This is a very solid budget kit of RAM, offering good speeds and timings for right around $80. 32GB is plenty for modern gaming and should be for years to come. 16GB is for the most part fine right now, but we're starting to see games favor 32, and once you start having other programs running on your machine like Discord or YouTube in another monitor, having 32GB is going to be very welcome. To install this, we're first going to open up the clips on slots 2 and 4 of our motherboard like this, and start by taking the first stick, lining the notch in it with the notch in the slot, lowering it down and then pressing it into place until the clip snaps shut. Then we can just repeat the same process for the second stick of RAM, and boom, our memory is successfully installed. Now it's time to get out our SSD, which in this case is going to be a 1TB NVMe SSD in the form of this Crucial P3. This is a solid budget NVMe drive for around $60. With that being said, the P3 Plus is currently around the same price, and I would probably recommend going with that instead because it's a Gen 4 drive where the P3 is a Gen 3 drive, so it should be a bit faster. 1TB should be enough for your OS, applications, and a modest games library. With that being said, if or when you run out of space, adding another drive is very simple because you have a free M.2 slot on the motherboard. To install this, we can bring it to the top M.2 slot on the motherboard and line the notch in it with the notch in the slot. Then it's inserted at an angle, hinged down, and secured with one of the M.2 screws found in the motherboard box. With that, we'd normally grab out the case, but we have one more thing to do before that, which is get the M.2 Wi-Fi ready. We'll start by unscrewing the M.2 Wi-Fi card, pulling it out, then reinstalling the screw for safekeeping. We're removing it because it's much easier to work on outside of the board. Now with the Wi-Fi cables / mounting hardware and the plastic cover from the motherboard box, we can get to work. We'll start by taking the small end of one of the Wi-Fi antennas and pressing it into the Wi-Fi card like this, and this is just repeated for the second antenna. This is a little annoying to do, but it's much easier than trying to do it with the card still in the board. Now we can take the plastic cover and press it onto the card like this. Next, we'll grab out the I/O shield from the motherboard box and take each cable and press them through the two holes in the I/O shield like this, then place one washer over each of the two antenna ports and tighten down a nut over each of those. With that done, we can place the I/O shield and motherboard off to the side and get out our case box. I went for a DIY PC ARGB N1, which came in at about $57 with free shipping, and for that price I think it's amazing, but apparently a lot of people did too because it's currently sold out. For under $60 you're getting a micro ATX fish tank style case with 3 included ARGB fans, solid build quality, and plenty of room for cable management. Now again, this is sold out, but pretty much any micro ATX case will work fine with this build, and I'll leave a few links to alternatives in the description. Once out of the box, the first thing to do is unscrew and remove the back panel like this and grab out the accessory box and manual. Then we can pop off the side panel and lift it away, then do the same thing for the front panel like this. With the case on its side, we can use pliers or a nut driver to remove this standoff here and move it to right here. Then we can add 2 more standoffs from the accessory box here and here. Next, we can bring the I/O shield to the back of the case like this and pop in all 4 corners into place until it's secure. Then we can gently hang the Wi-Fi card over the edge like this. And the final thing to do before grabbing the motherboard is to bend the top 2 I/O cover pieces back and forth until they snap off and can be lifted away. Now we can take our motherboard and lower it into the case, lining the I/O up with the I/O shield, and so we can see the standoffs beneath the motherboard holes. Then to secure the board, we will install 1 motherboard screw into each of the motherboard holes with a standoff beneath them. Order doesn't matter, we just need to make sure they're all secure. With that done, we can remove the M.2 Wi-Fi screw, insert the M.2 Wi-Fi card at an angle like this, hinge it down, and then secure it with the screw we just removed. It's also a good idea to neaten up and flatten down the Wi-Fi antennas like this. Now with the case back on its side, we can grab out our power supply, which in this case is the MSI Mag 8550BN, which is an 80+ bronze rated power supply offering 550 watts of power. I grabbed this unit at $50, but it does bounce between $50 and $60, so I'll leave a link to an equivalent unit in the description that's also $50 if this one is overpriced or sold out. 550 watts is plenty for this build, and while it is non-modular, it does have all black sleeve cables and the excess can be easily hidden away in the case. With the fan facing down, we can insert it into the back of the case like this and secure it with 4 power supply screws in each of the 4 corners. Then we can start by routing cables by pushing each one through the hole that will bring it closest to the connector on the motherboard, and I'm going to throw the locations for each on the screen right now. With everything routed, we can plug one of the case's SATA cables into one of the SATA power connectors on the power supply and set the case onto its side. We'll start by plugging in the 8-pin CPU power cable up in the corner here, then we can plug the 24-pin connector into the motherboard over here, then below that we can plug in the front panel USB-C cable here. At the bottom, we'll start by plugging in the small front panel connectors based on the diagram on screen now, then we'll plug in the USB 3 and finally the HD audio connector in the bottom corner here. Now to prep for the GPU, we can remove this back panel PCIe cover right here and open up the lock on the PCIe slot like this. With that, we can grab out the last part of the build, which is our GPU, and in this case is the Intel Arc B570, as you can't buy the B580 right now. Also, the Blue Sparkle model at $230 is the only one you can actually buy right now that's close to MSRP. This card uses a dual fan design with very solid build quality, and while I would prefer it to be all black or another neutral color, we are able to make it work aesthetically with this build. Performance-wise, this is a great card with 10GB of video memory and plenty of horsepower for 1080p gaming and even 1440p gaming in a lot of titles. If you're watching this in the future when you can get Arc B580s at MSRP, if that future even exists, then please pony up the extra $20 and get that instead, as it's noticeably faster and has 2 extra gigabytes of video memory. To install this card, we just have to line it up with the slot, lower it down, press it into place, secure it with 2 screws, reinstall the cover, and finally plug in the 8-pin PCIe power cable. With that done, we can lift the case onto its feet and do the last task, which is cable manage the system. To do this, we just pull all the excess cable link to the back of the case and continually check to see how it looks in the main chamber. Then we can tie down some of the cable runs with the included zip ties, and once that's done, the back panel can be put on, along with the front panel and the side panel. When I tried to turn it on for the first time, it wasn't turning on, but I didn't panic and just did a quick visual inspection, which I found the power button cable got pulled out while cable managing, so I plugged that back in, and sure enough, the system booted right up. Then I just used the LED button on the side of the case to make the fans a solid blue color, which I think the combination of the blue and black components looks pretty nice in my opinion. Then before I could install and test games, I had to install and set up Windows 10, install the drivers, and once everything was confirmed working, I set the XMP profile. I'll leave links on how to do all that stuff in the description down below. Then I could do the real last task, which is this. With that, it's time to test out some games. I tried to test a variety, but if there's others you'd like to see tested in the future, let me know in the comments below. So without further ado, here are the gaming benchmarks. So let's go ahead and start off with Minecraft, which I tested at 1080p with the default settings and are on screen now, as well as by using Iris and BLS shaders. I just loaded into a new world and ran around to see what kind of FPS I would get. After a couple of minutes of doing this, I saw an average of 270 FPS with 1% lows of 85. This is pretty solid performance in my opinion, and shows that the system is easily able to handle Minecraft with shaders. The next game I tested is Rust, which I played at 1080p with the settings it defaulted me to, which I think would be considered high, but again are on screen right now. I loaded into a random server and just ran around for a bit. Doing this resulted in a 131 FPS average with a 1% lows of 49. I didn't go by any major monuments or get into any gunfights or anything, but hopefully this will be an okay reference point for those of you who play Rust. Now let's talk about Borderlands 3, which I tested at 1080p with the high preset and DirectX 12 mode. Running the in-game benchmark produced a respectable 119 FPS average with 1% lows of 90, which is great performance in my opinion. Next up is Marvel Rivals, which I tested at the high settings it defaulted me to and by hopping into a few quick play matches. Doing this resulted in a not so great 62 FPS average with 1% lows of 41. I'm not sure if this is an optimization issue on Intel Arc cards right now or what, but I was definitely expecting higher performance than what I saw. In Valorant, I tested at 1080p high settings, and by hopping into some death matches, doing this resulted in a very high 661 FPS average with 1% lows of 343. This was obviously a very smooth and enjoyable experience, and shows that for a lot of esports games at 1080p, this machine is actually a bit overkill. In Fortnite, I tested at 1080p in performance mode with epic view distance and high textures, and by hopping into some Team Rumbles matches, doing this resulted in a very solid 222 FPS average with 1% lows of 93, which was great performance, and surprisingly the 1% lows weren't atrocious the entire time like they usually are in Fortnite, especially on budget systems. For Cyberpunk 2077, I tested this game at 1080p with the high preset and by using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in an average of 115 FPS with 1% lows of 83, which is great performance in Cyberpunk and shows that high refresh rate gaming in a lot of modern AAA titles is totally doable. Black Myth Wukong was another game that underperformed in my opinion. I tested using the free benchmarking tool and by using the high preset with 100% resolution scaling. Doing this resulted in a measly 55 FPS average with 1% lows of 41. Again, I'm not sure if this was an optimization thing or what, but I definitely expected higher numbers. And speaking of optimizations, a new game that definitely needs them is Monster Hunter Wilds, which I tested with the benchmark tool at 1080p high settings, and doing this resulted in a 53 FPS average with 1% lows of 27. And while this isn't that far off from a 60 FPS average, it doesn't tell the whole story, and there were some major FPS dips during the combat scenes. All in all, I think performance on this system is very solid, especially taking into account the $750 price tag. Temp-wise, this PC did really well, with the GPU mainly staying in the mid to upper 50s while gaming, and the CPU staying in the upper 50s to mid 60s, which again is great temps in my opinion. Overall, this system is pretty darn good. For $750, it plays pretty much anything at 1080p 60 FPS, while also giving you a nice looking build, and more importantly, one that is upgradable and should be reliable. With that being said, there are a million ways I could have went parts wise, so if you would have done something different, let me know in the comments below, and also let me know your overall thoughts on this build. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.